I've driven this stretch of highway 100 times. Route 17 cuts through the Roanoke Valley like a scar. 2 lanes of cracked asphalt winding through woods so dense they swallow the moonlight. I knew every curve, every mile marker, every forgotten gas station that had been boarded up since the 90s. But I didn't know her, and that night I wish I'd never stopped. It was mid-November, the rain had started around 10, a cold drizzle that turned the asphalt into a black mirror. My windshield wipers were struggling, smearing the glow of oncoming headlights into streaks of white fire. I was driving home from a weekend conference in Richmond, running on coffee and highway hypnosis. My eyes were heavy, the kind of tired where the road starts to blur at the edges. Then I saw her, a figure standing at the side of the road, just past the old Watkins Mill exit. A stretch so isolated there wasn't a house for miles. She was wearing a pale yellow dress, thin for November, soaked through by the rain. No coat, no umbrella, no bags. Just standing there with her thumb out, her dark hair plastered against her face. She looked like she'd been there for hours. Every survival instinct told me to keep driving. You don't pick up hitchhikers, especially not on deserted roads at midnight. But something about her, the way she stood so perfectly still, the way she didn't wave or signal, just held her thumb out like a statue, made me slow down. Maybe it was pity, maybe it was curiosity. I'll never know which part of me reached for the lock and pushed the door open. She slid into the passenger seat without a word. The smell of wet earth and something else, something floral, like old funeral flowers, filled the car. I asked her where she was going. She said, "Just down the road." The old Miller farm? Her voice was flat, barely above a whisper. I knew the Miller farm. It had been abandoned since I was a kid. The family died in a fire back in '89. But I didn't say anything. I just nodded and pulled back onto the highway. The silence was unbearable. She didn't look at me, didn't adjust the seat, didn't reach for the heater despite being drenched. She just stared straight ahead through the windshield, her hands folded in her lap, perfectly still. I tried to make conversation, asked if she was okay, where she'd come from, why she was out in a storm with no coat. She answered in fragments, always the same flat tone. Long walk, lost track of time, didn't feel the cold. I was about 10 miles past the Watkins exit when she spoke again. "You can turn here." There was no road, just a break in the trees where an old gravel path led into the darkness, nearly swallowed by weeds. I told her that wasn't the way to the Miller farm. She turned to look at me for the first time, and I nearly swerved off the road. Her eyes, they weren't white, they were black. Completely black, like pools of oil with no iris, no pupil, just endless dark. "I've been waiting for you," she said. Her voice changed, deeper now, layered, like two people speaking at once. "I've been waiting a long time." My foot hit the brake. The car skidded on the wet asphalt, fishtailing before I wrestled it to a stop in the middle of the road. I was breathing hard, my hands shaking on the wheel. She didn't move, didn't react to the sudden stop. She just kept staring at me with those black eyes. And then she told me her name was Mary Miller. She had been 17 years old in the summer of 1989, the night her family's farmhouse caught fire. She had run down the gravel path, through the woods to the highway, trying to flag down a car. Any car, but no one stopped. Car after car passed her in the rain. She stood there for hours, watching the orange glow of her burning home through the trees until the smoke reached her too. "They found my body 3 days later," she said, "in the ditch, half a mile from the highway. I'd made it further than they thought, but not far enough." She turned back to the windshield. "I've been standing on this road ever since, watching the cars go by, waiting for someone to stop." Her voice cracked for the first time. "You're the first one who ever did." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation. Carbon monoxide poisoning, sleep deprivation, a stroke. But I knew deep in my bones that none of those were true. "Can you take me home?" she asked. "The old farm. I want to see it one more time." Her eyes were normal again, dark brown, tired, human. She looked like a scared teenager, not a ghost. And against every instinct screaming inside me, I put the car in drive and turned onto the gravel path. The Miller farm was exactly as I'd heard, a burned-out shell of a house, the roof collapsed, blackened timbers reaching for the sky like skeletal fingers. The barn had somehow survived, though its roof sagged and its doors hung open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Weeds had reclaimed the yard. An old tractor sat rusting at the edge of the field, half swallowed by kudzu. She got out of the car before I'd fully stopped. She walked through the yard like she was seeing it through a dream. Touching the old oak tree by the driveway, running her fingers along the burned doorway, she stopped at what used to be the front steps and knelt down, touching the scorched ground. I stayed by the car, watching. The rain had stopped, the clouds parted, and for a moment, moonlight flooded the scene, turning the ruin into something almost beautiful. She stood up and turned to face me. For the first time that night, she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was sad, grateful, tired. "Thank you," she said, "for stopping, for bringing me home." The moonlight seemed to gather around her, and I realized I could see through her, the burned doorway visible through her translucent form. "Tell my mother I'm sorry. I tried to get home, and then she was gone. Just like that, the mist swallowed her, and I was alone in the yard. I drove home in a daze. The next morning, I called the county records office and asked about the Miller family. The fire was on record, August 1989, 3 confirmed fatalities. But there was an addendum I hadn't known about. Mary Miller's body was never found in the house. They assumed she'd been trapped in the worst part of the blaze. But I knew now where she'd really been, standing on the side of Route 17, waiting for someone to stop. I still drive that road sometimes. And every time I pass the old Watkins Mill exit, I slow down, just in case she's still there, waiting.